Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we both are in places where patients discovered cannabis because, that's what they needed to find some solution to these really vexing
Yes.
condition that affects.
Exactly.
So that's sort of similar thing happened here, in terms of
Yeah.
discovery of this. I remember some of the early MS doctors here, kind of starting to have those moments. Dr. Bowen, he was a professor in our medical school, and would
Right.
sort of make mention of it. And I remember meeting MS patients. They were the first ones that, one guy moved all the way from Illinois, and he said,
Right.
I'd rather be I don't want to be a prisoner in my own body. So I'd rather, risk prison, some other kind of prison, so I'm not a prisoner in my own body. And so he moved across the state, and was having his own, all the different symptoms, an old middle-aged man with MS. So I've seen significant things in that field. And boy,
Yeah.
I've also seen like the hemming and hawing in the MS societies and sort of, we can't
Yeah.
read the data right and how to make sense of it. Nobody's sort of recognizing, okay, patients really need something. And if there's something here and if it's safe, it can be monitored, like let's continue to learn, but let's also continue to recognize what we know so far and it was always like that kind of, it was not that position. It was always like, well, we don't really know enough, so we can't really say anything. So, tough luck. And
I find that very difficult because one of the questions they suggested we talked about was what are these challenges, what we face in the UK, and it may be the case in the US. I'd be interested to hear. Was that most of the doctors, most of my colleagues, are so skeptical about it, and we've had children with drug-resistant epilepsy who have 300 or 400 seizures a month, if not a week. Alfie was in that category. They've failed on all licensed medications, nothing else to offer at all. And yet the pediatric neurology community, particularly in the UK, have said, no, we're not going to try cannabis. And I find that very difficult to understand because there's nothing else to try. And it's, as you said, it's safe. It's not going to work for everybody, but it works for a lot of the children. Probably we did a study in the UK from the Drug Science Project that showed 96% of children had a response.
wow.
Not necessarily a great response in some, but a great response in others. Why not try it as it's safe? If it doesn't work, you've got nothing to lose. And that's one of the challenges I face in the UK is getting most of the doctors on board with it. We have just put a number on it for you. There's several tens of thousands of doctors in the UK. I think the number is 128,000.
That's the total number of physicians in the country.
Total number of qualified doctors, medical doctors in the UK.
Okay.
There's 120 prescribing doctors.
Oh my God. The first thing that comes to mind, I know that scenario, and it sort of there was like that in some of the early states of when we had medical cannabis laws, that have now been in place since '96, but not every state. But in the early states and early places, it was always these very single digit or double digit, even though the academy or the body was much thousands and thousands more. But one of the things that I've always I know is an issue because as a practicing doc myself, the amount of red tape that is needed, and any particular, if I have to write a whole detailed application with lots and lots of documentation and my medical records and collation of this and collection of experts and doing all these things just to sort of get an approval for something that might take a while, and it's sort of it's very disheartening. And then you wonder, am I are they sort of am I going to get singled out for audit and review now that I'm doing this thing that's kind of controversial? Those are always the barriers that I think, and unfortunately, the other thing is that most people don't know that, you might think, oh gosh, I'm going to do this. Let's say you're trying to treat somebody that's dying of sepsis, and that giving them a liter of fluid is going to change their life, but you have to go through tons of red tape to get that liter of fluid ordered. But you might do it because you have seen it over and over again in the hospital in your training, how much fluid hydration, resuscitation makes in the life of somebody who's got sepsis. Like, it saves their life. But here in cannabis, and in the anti-epileptic, neuromodulatory, anti-neuroinflammatory, all those protective things, you don't hardly ever see that. Like, where have I ever walked into a ward and I've seen like the before and after? And so one of the things that I would do when I gave talks back in the old days, like I remember I gave a talk in India once at a medical college there in Orissa State, and a few other places. I actually, even with neurologists, I think I would show videos, of movement disorder patients. Like, and I thought the movement disorder is so stark, Parkinsonian features. And there was, the Israelis were making some excellent documentation of their changes in the subjects, and those really, like, that was and then I also saw there was a Tourette's cases too in Germany. So I would have these videos, and those kinds of things are very hard. You can't sort of fake that, and it was like as convincing as saving a life. So I want to suggest that as a sometimes.
Yeah, I think they're incredibly convincing, but many of our colleagues just say, well, if it hasn't got a double-blind placebo-controlled study, it's a waste of time. And that's the attitude of many of the British medics. They look upon it as a pharmaceutical, when you can do double-blind placebo-controlled studies, and that's a perfectly good way to do things. But the cannabis plant, of course, you can't do that. It's so complicated. 100, what is the number now? 157 cannabinoids, 100 terpenes, 100 flavonoids. You can't make a double-blind placebo-controlled study out of that. It's a very personalized medicine. You can't make a placebo. It's just not possible.
No, but I mean, there are plenty of, you can extrapolate. I used to visit the lab when I was at NYU for my residency. I went to visit Oren Davinsky, and he's epileptologist. Probably you're aware of his work, and he was one of the early Epidiolex clinical trialists in the U.S. I remember he showed me, like, this is the safe that we ordered, and we're still waiting on the medicine. This is before they got things started. But I mean, because of his work and the University of Alabama and other centers, we got really good double-blind, controlled trials of one particular formulation. And I think that's...
Yeah, I think that's the point. I should have clarified that. I think isolates, like Epidiolex isn't quite an isolate, is it? But it's nearly. You can do that. That's great. My objection to that and Sativex is effectively two isolates put together, so you can do a double-blind placebo-controlled on that. Absolutely great. I don't think you can do them satisfactorily on the full spectrum product. And in my view, I'd like to see what you feel. I think the full spectrum product is much better than the isolate products, clearly. And so it's those products. I mean, doctors in the UK will be happy to have isolate CBG or CBD or THC, whatever. But they would miss out. My view is, why develop an isolate when the plant as a whole is so much better than the individual components? And so that's my objection to them. Is they're obsessed with isolate pharmaceuticalizing cannabis.
Monomolecular medicine is one funny term I've heard on that that the bent. And it's like, we've done some amazing things in the chemistry labs. I have a chemistry degree myself, and I've seen all kinds of things. But boy, it's sort of a sense that the plant chemistry is too messy, too much. We can't track it, and I think that's a lack of experience. Just sort of knowing a different form of medicine. And in England, I mean, the history of herbal therapies goes back thousands of years. It was where things began, and I think. You only need to look at that, and then you just, I would always make jokes like, if you like, do you enjoy tea for its rich body? Or if I could just give you a caffeine pill, would that be enough for you? English, of course, love their tea. So I kind of, there are other places where we understand, like, for good quality taste and for the aroma, and even there's a psychoactive experience with tea nobody wants to talk about, but it's a calming. Theanine is there in green tea, and caffeine. And so there's all kinds of like mixing that we're used to, but when it comes to medicine, we want dosing. I think dosing is important. And so you say to folks, we can analyze and test sort of some of the key botanical drug substances in this mixture, like CBD or CBN or THC, and then testing it. Then there's going to be a spectrum of minor cannabinoids that are synergents. and that's
Yeah.
it's going. It might. It depends on, like, are you going to standardize this for the whole population? Or are you doing this for a small subset? Is this just for my one patient, or is this for a collection of patients? I think that that's sort of where people want, like, hey, how can I have because look, when I'm treating seizures, and I tell this to patients in the early days when they come to me, like, you get a seizure disorder, if we go off of the pharmaceuticals, of course, which may or may not be helping, that's one thing. But if whatever they did, you always knew that you would be able to get an exact duplicate of that same medicine the following month and the following month and the following month, until barring some shortages. But if we switch you over to cannabis, and now it's something that's helping you, but it was a particular variety with this particular chemical fingerprint that was really hit all the right modulations, and we know there's huge genetic diversity. But I don't know when that batch is done, if they're going to be able to grow again another batch that's similar enough. So you do enter into an area of, oh well, gosh, what's going to happen to me after that? I mean, that's a real worry. I think that, and some patients also will worry, like, I'll feel better for a while, but what's the point if I won't feel better for a year, or if I won't change my functional ability enough consistently that I can go to school? Let's, in the case of these children. So those are some of the out of those valid fears, I think there's some things to acknowledge there. But the solution to that is not just sort of not use it. You sort of support the people like you're doing. It sounds like
exactly. Yeah, the solution is not to ignore it, because it's here to stay now. I mean, we've got now tiny numbers. We've got 22,000 people in the UK prescribed. Sadly, all but three privately.
Wow.
Most of our system in the UK, some of the listeners may not be aware, is 90% of healthcare in the UK is the National Health Service, which is the government sector.
Yes.
NHS. There's 3 prescriptions on NHS and 22,000 privately.
Oh my God, I didn't know that. Wow.
Which is crazy, and the people have to pay out their own pocket. But nevertheless, despite that, it's getting.
How much do they have to pay? Like, what do you mean pay? Pay for the medical service,
probably,
or pay for the medicine?
Yeah, they have to pay privately for the doctor's consultation, which has come down in price now. It's subsidised in a sense by the clinics at about £50 to £100 sterling, which these days with the British economy, it's about the same as the dollar.
Right.
And then you pay for the medicine. It depends what you get, clearly, but on average, maybe $300 a month. And you multiply that by 12 plus the consultation fee, you're looking at $4,000 or $5,000 a year, and a lot of people can't afford that. It's outside, and that's out of their own pocket. There's no insurance or anything.
Right.
So it's although I'm quite positive. Well, the law was changed in November 18. We've got people prescribed, which we didn't have 4 years ago, but it's been slow, and we reckon there's something like 1.4 million people who use cannabis for medical purposes every year in the UK. Add to that, let's make a number up almost, another 500,000 who probably would benefit but don't want to criminalize themselves.
Right.
So you've got conservatively about 2 million people, and so we're about 1% of the total cannabis potential benefiting population after 4 years. So at this rate, it'll be about another 300 years before we get everyone treated.